Matt Rule and the Nebraska Cornhuskers are one step closer to reviving Nebraska's storied and treasured blue blood program in a 14-7 close game-controlling win over Big Ten Conference foe Rutgers football, coached by Greg Schiano. I want to unleash a few thoughts about this game really before we get into the analytics and the reaction and analysis of this game. Number one, this combination of outcomes, Nebraska beating a Big Ten team, it being at home, there being doubts surrounding this team, really with having a slow start against Purdue and losing to Illinois the week before the Purdue game, so 2 weeks ago, the fact that Rutgers is a competent team who is strong at the lines of scrimmage, kind of built like Wisconsin teams have been in the past, that's a combination of outcomes that hasn't occurred in several years. I would say the last time that in a one-score game against a competent, good, not just competent, let's raise the bar a little bit, good Big Ten team, that Nebraska won was 2015 against Michigan State. Now, that 2015 Spartan team was better than this Rutgers team. But this Rutgers team, I think, is still pretty good. And I think if not for some poor decisions by the coaching staff, could have won against Nebraska. But they didn't. That's could. That's woulda, shoulda, coulda. And Nebraska out-coached Rutgers. They outplayed Rutgers. They were the more physical team. They were the better team. Period, point blank. And we'll get into that later. Number two, I think this game for Nebraska is very, very significant. I know that Nebraska was favored to win. They closed at -7, -6.5 in spread. I know this. However, there were reasons to pick Rutgers, and also Nebraska's been favored before to beat good teams, to play good teams close. They've been favored even against the small teams by a lot. And we all know how those games ended up in the Mike Riley and Scott Frost era. This win to Nebraska, to the 87,464 fans in the stadium, and to the probably hundreds of thousands of Nebraska fans elsewhere, meant as much to this program, probably, from my perspective at least, as the Rose Bowl win meant to Michigan last season. Not the national championship win, because that's something that can only be compared with other national championship game wins. But a scenario where, in the same way that after that exciting up and down Rose Bowl performance where Michigan played one of their worst games of the year and won, Michigan fans breathed a sigh of relief. Like, okay, we're an elite team, and we're breaking through in a way that we haven't before. And for Nebraska, it's the same thing here. 5-1, Nebraska is. They're 2-1 in Big Ten Conference play, and they're not losing to UCLA. And they'll probably beat one of USC or Wisconsin based off of how those teams have looked and how Nebraska has looked. Nebraska going bowling, as I said in the preseason, is inevitable. The question is, will they go beyond that? And with a win here, that's very possible. And that's what I want to get into today. But before we do that, I encourage you to like the video, to subscribe to the channel, to hit the notification bell so that you can get notified when we post more Nebraska Cornhusker content, more Rutgers Scarlet Knights content, or more college football content in general, more preview and prediction and reaction and analysis videos. Comment your reaction and analysis down in the comment section below. You may have saw something, and probably did see something, that I missed. And also share this video around and channel around to others who love college football like we do. Join the Discord server via the link in the description or down below in the pinned comment, where we have 18 threads dedicated to college football. Dedicated specifically to Big Ten college football teams. We have more than 18 threads dedicated to college football. And also check out the Patreon page and the merchandise store if you want to support the channel in an extra way. Your support means the world. Thank you for watching this video, and again, watch it all the way through so that you can get all the information I'm going to deliver to you, and like, share, subscribe, hit the bell, and comment. But 14-7 It was a tight one. It was. It didn't feel like it for much of the game, especially early on and at halftime when Nebraska led 14-0. But the reality is that while Rutgers probably wasn't going to win this game, in hindsight at least, hindsight's 2020, Rutgers was not going to allow Nebraska to just escape and win easily and cruise their way to a dominant win where everyone thinks, whoa, was the Illinois game a fluke? Is Illinois that good? Consequently, is Penn State that good? Like, wow, Nebraska's a bowling ball here. That wasn't going to happen because Nebraska is a team that I still think is a year or more away from actual contention, and Rutgers, even with all their flaws, is well coached. They have a good defense. Their offense is underrated, and you get 14-7. That's how this game is forged here. The difference is, as I said earlier, Nebraska actually came up clutch, and they won in a game where they would typically lose. That's why I picked Rutgers to win this game, was their special teams advantage, which Rutgers had a poorly executed fake field goal. Rutgers gave up a 30-yard pass from Brian Buschini, which didn't result in anything, but was still pretty humiliating. Jai Patel missed his field goal, and Rutgers, I don't think, relied on their special teams enough. If they kicked a field goal on 4th and goal, if they kicked a field goal on the fake field goal attempt and made it, well, then they're at a point where they only need to drive down and kick a field goal to win. Or if Patel makes the field goal that he barely missed, they win the game that way. But regardless, they had the special teams edge over Nebraska because Nebraska giving up a blocked punt, they didn't even use their kicker. I mean, how many times do Nebraska fans have to demand that there need to be changes, especially with Ed Foley? And it's clear, a lot of the times fans can be wrong. For example, as a Michigan fan, I thought that Jack Tuttle coming in would be the death spell for Michigan against Washington. And if not for him coming in, Washington may have blown out the Wolverines. He actually inspired a near comeback that Michigan failed to take advantage of. But anyway, Nebraska special teams came up short, and Rutgers had some initial success running the football. Those are reasons primarily, along with the fact that I think Nebraska hadn't formed that clutch mentality yet. They were getting closer, but it wasn't complete, were reasons why I picked Rutgers to win 24-21. That's not what happened. I was wrong. Straight up. And it wasn't like it was a 7-7 game in the fourth and it just happened to go the other way. Nebraska was game controlling Rutgers, and they would have had to masterfully choke the game away, and Rutgers would have had to put together an offensive drive equivalent to Alabama's against Auburn in 2021 to have a chance of sending this game into overtime. Rutgers averaged 3.8 yards per play. That is less yards per play than Washington allowed against an inept Michigan offense and that Ohio State allowed against an Iowa offense that is not as good as Rutgers. I mean, Rutgers has a better passing offense. And Rutgers, I don't think has the better rushing attack, but it's pretty close. Pretty close. Nebraska's defense also didn't have much of an offense to support it throughout the game. Dylan Raiola had the worst game of his career. His young career, yes, but no touchdowns, a pick, got pressured, was taking too long to pass the football, was making a lot of freshman mistakes, and looked like a deer in the headlights at times. And the special teams, well, they gave up a blocked punt where Rutgers recovered inside of Nebraska territory, inside Nebraska's 5. Nebraska held them. They held them to a goal line stand, a 4 and out, where Nebraska then took over and punted it away, but still denied Rutgers the opportunity to get what should have been an easy touchdown. Consequently, Rutgers only scored 0.096 points per play. They didn't even score a tenth of a point per play. The Scarlet Knights did not. That's absolutely crazy. That right there is wow. It's just nuts. 0.096 points per play. Nebraska only scored 0.197 points per play themselves. They didn't do that well on offense, but that extra tenth of a point, technically extra 0.1 101 points per play over Rutgers. That was a big deal, though. And Nebraska averaged 3.7 yards per play. So Nebraska's offense was bad in this game, and they have some serious issues, I think, running the football. That's another reason I picked Rutgers to win this game, is I thought Nebraska's issues of running the football were really created by themselves, and therefore they wouldn't be able to take advantage of a Rutgers rushing defense that is objectively bad. They were 133rd, 132nd in the country in yards allowed per carry entering this game. They let Jonah Coleman and Bashal Tutin, who are very good running backs, look like Heisman winners running the ball on them. And Nebraska, you factor in sacks, they only averaged 2.3 yards per carry and 2 rushing touchdowns. Emmett Johnson only averaged 2.4 yards per carry. Dowdle had 4.1. Ramir Johnson had 6.8. Bonner had an 11-yard touchdown run on an end around. Overall, Nebraska's offense did very poorly. If you gave me Nebraska averaging 3.7 yards per play and only scoring 0.197 points per play entering this game, and the fact that they gave up a blocked punt, I would have kind of chuckled and said, yeah, my prediction's right. But that wasn't the case because Nebraska showed up defensively. And despite the fact that once again they lost the penalty battle, 7 penalties, 37 yards, Rutgers only had 4 penalties, 28 yards, Nebraska won the turnover battle. Raiola threw a pick, Kaliakmanis threw 2 picks. And it really was even worse than that. The turnovers don't show you the full picture because Rutgers was 2 of 6 on 4th down. Nebraska was 3 of 3. So if you treat 4th downs like turnovers, because literally turnover on downs, well, Nebraska was plus 5 in the turnover battle. If you count 4th downs and turnovers as the same thing, which really what a 4th down turnover is just a turnover with less variance. You can't get the turnover recovered for 6 points, like a pick 6 or a fumble recovery for 6, but you also, unless you turn it over on the 1 yard line, you don't get the situation where you throw a pick and it's really an arm punt either. So Nebraska just winning drives, winning the turnover battle, and even though they shot themselves in the foot at times, they didn't. They bent and they tried to break themselves, but they never broke. And I want to transition quickly to Rutgers and then talk about Nebraska later here, because we like to talk about the winners last because we save the best for last. And Rutgers, well, they had every opportunity to win this game, and they didn't. They did not take advantage of circumstances. Nebraska didn't let them take advantage of circumstances, and they clearly have more limitations than I thought they did. They're not a top 20 team. They may not even be top 25, and I thought they were entering this football game. But what I will say is they survived their toughest game. Just pretend the comma isn't there on the screen. I originally typed a different title and forgot to remove that. But they survived their toughest game, and the path is still bright for the Rutgers Scarlet Knights for the reason that you look at their schedule. Their remaining opponent who's ranked is solely Illinois. That's it. Illinois at home. And I do think that while Illinois beat Nebraska, I don't think that the Illini are the same team in the sense of their ceiling. I think that Illinois probably has a higher ceiling or a higher floor, but a lower ceiling. And Illinois is playing Rutgers later in the year in Piscataway. Meanwhile, Rutgers had to travel on the road to Nebraska. So factoring in home field advantage and the fact that, well, I don't think Illinois has the same ceiling that Nebraska does, tells me, in my opinion, that Rutgers probably survived their toughest test of the season. USC on the road, I don't think they have the same physicality that Nebraska does, and that matches up well with a Rutgers team that if they can run the football, they will run 75-25 on you, and that is not good for USC. UCLA, very beatable. Same with Michigan State and Maryland on the road. Same with Minnesota at home, Wisconsin at home. Illinois at home, that's a winnable game. USC on the road is a winnable game, even though it is at 11 p.m. Eastern time, which means the bodily clock is going to be messed up. I know it's also a Friday night, so there's not much time to prepare, but Rutgers can do it. Miami did it, and Miami constantly shot themselves in the foot. I think Rutgers is a more disciplined team than the Miami Hurricanes are. Miami Hurricanes are way better, but they could be even better, like top 4, top 3 good, if they were more disciplined and better coached. Rutgers, being a well-coached team with Greg Schiano, having a running back in Kyle Monangai, Kyle Monangai did not receive much help from his offensive line the whole game. There were 2 plays that I could count where he should have been tackled in the backfield. He made Nebraska defenders miss and picked up 10 yards or more on those carries. He had a long of 17, 19 carries, 78 yards, 4.1 yards per carry, no touchdowns, but overall, in my mind, had a pretty good performance against a rushing defense that obviously stepped up, that obviously had some interesting and potentially flukish performances against Northern Iowa and also against Illinois late. But here we are. They stepped up, and Rutgers' offensive line did get, they got toyed with a little bit. I mean, when you give up 4 sacks and 9 tackles for loss and you only run for 2.4 yards per carry, that's not a good look on an offensive line that was once graded the highest by Pro Football Focus for the entire country. All that being said, though, they survived their toughest game, and they're going to move on. They're going to get through this. Wisconsin is not the same caliber of team that Nebraska is. Doesn't mean they should be taken lightly. They should not be taken lightly one bit. Purdue sucks, I know that, but Wisconsin is going to have some juice and energy from what was nearly a 50-point win over Purdue, 52-6. By the way, Purdue looks exactly like Rutgers did a few years ago with Chris Ash. I don't know if Ryan Walters is going to survive the year, but topic for a different video. Rutgers can win. They could potentially win out. I don't think they will based off of what I saw. Is it possible? Yes. Likely, obviously not. But 9-3, 10-2, 11-1, that is in the cards for Rutgers. 8-4, I'd say is not a lock because, well, they have 7 more games to play. But I'd say it's likely because going 3-4 in these final games is, I would say, close to a lock. It would actually be disappointing in my mind if they went 3-4 in these final games with the talent they have on the offensive line, on defense, and their defense, because they're getting players back from injury, will get better and better as the year goes on. I imagine that would be the same thing with Kaliakmanis and the offense, especially since Nebraska's defense is going to be the best defense they play this year by a mile. Remember, they don't play Ohio State, they don't play Penn State, and they don't play Iowa. Right now, those are probably the 3 best defenses in the country. And Michigan, who I thought was going to be one of the 3 best defenses in the country, but isn't, but still has a lot of talent, Rutgers doesn't play them either. So they avoid a lot of teams that have the profile of Nebraska, where Nebraska could shut down Purdue's rushing offense and make them have to throw and also rely totally on a defense with some weaknesses to win games. I don't think any other team on Nebraska's schedule, or Rutgers' schedule, can do that. And also, obviously, they have a limited ceiling, but that's more of a problem for what happens if, let's say, they're down to USC on the road by more than 1 score, or Maryland does to Rutgers what they have done to Rutgers in the previous few years, and they get up on them early, or Minnesota, maybe they're controlling the clock, they have a 10-point lead, it's in the 3rd quarter, Minnesota's running the football, they're being patient. This is a team in Rutgers who was fortunate to actually be in the game late in the 4th against Nebraska. 14-0 at the half, I looked at that score and thought to myself, oh my goodness, Nebraska's going to roll away with this one. Like, Rutgers has a chance, and maybe they could come back, and it's not over. But there's also an opportunity for the Cornhuskers to make this 24-0 or 28-0 or 31-0, or any of those offensive scores with Rutgers having a 7 or a 3 or something, maybe even in garbage time. They have a limited ceiling, and I think that Kaliakmanis got exposed, and their offensive line was obviously manhandled. No further statements needed there. You just look at the numbers. 4 sacks allowed, 7 TFLs allowed, 23 carries for running backs, only netted 90 yards. That is still not 4 yards per carry. So you factor out Kaliakmanis' runs and sacks, Monangai and the depth backs behind him, including Samuel Brown V, did not even average 4 yards per carry. And if you want to take out some Monangai's long runs or the busted tackles that Nebraska had, well, he didn't do much of anything at all. Monangai didn't. And he is a near elite to elite running back, one of my favorite players because he's an absolute tank. I love Rutgers' offensive line, or at least loved them. We'll see what they do in these next few games because Nebraska has a plethora of NFL players and future NFL players on their defensive line. But the offensive line got manhandled. And look at Kaliakmanis' stat line. 15 of 37 for 186 yards, 5 yards per pass attempt, 1 touchdown, which happened late, 2 interceptions, and a 19.3 quarterback efficiency rating. 15 of 37, only completing about 40% of his passes, 40.5% to be exact. He had an 80.9 passer rating, some Spencer Petras, Deacon Hill type stuff. By the way, Dylan Raiola had a lower QBR than Ethan Kaliakmanis did. If you want to try and guess that, please type that in the comment section below, and we can play a little bit of a guess the numbers game. But it was lower, and I'll reveal that number in a few minutes, few seconds. But to borrow a line from Eminem, and I can't sing or rap at all, guess who's back? Back again. Go Big Red. Nebraska's back. They won their first one-score game against a winning team since 2018. By a winning team, I mean a team who entered the matchup with a winning record. Got to go all the way back, and I'm not counting the group of 5. This is Power 5, Power 4. No one cares if undefeated Manhattan School of the Poor comes and you beat them 70-0. That doesn't matter. And that's not a shot to anyone in Manhattan who is poor. This is in a sports football sense. No one cares if an undefeated D3 team comes to Nebraska, or undefeated McNeese State or North Dakota, to reference some past lower level teams who've given Nebraska fits. If they come and Nebraska beats them, doesn't matter. We only care about the power teams here. 2018, 9-6, Scott Frost earns, technically, by opponent win percentage, his best win of his entire tenure by beating Michigan State in a defensive, low-scoring slugfest in a blizzard, in a snowstorm, on a windy day. Barrett Pickering was the hero of that game. This is big. I said this at the start of the video. This is to Nebraska what the Rose Bowl win was for Michigan. And I don't think that's a stretch one bit. I don't. Especially when you compare that Michigan had struggled to break through in big games, specifically over the past 3 seasons in 21 and 22, the playoff after they had beaten OSU. Like, they had gotten over the Ohio State hump, were able to beat Penn State on the road, but beyond that, they couldn't do much. So you figured maybe it was just a Ryan Day against Michigan problem, or Michigan found a way to match up well with Ohio State, but they couldn't match up well with the SEC. Well, they had their breakthrough relative to the expectations, relative to the norm, relative to even the fact that Harbaugh in 21 and 22 raised the bar, and he raised expectations, and he leveled the program up, but they still hadn't hit what Michigan's potential and what the expectations should be at Michigan were, winning a national championship. Well, the Rose Bowl win was the path to that. That was the point where you realized the hope could be reality. And for Nebraska, while this may be a stretch in some senses, in another sense, I think it is synonymous with that Rose Bowl win relative to the expectations. Matt Rule already has done things that leveled up over the previous few seasons. Last year's 5-7 team showed a level of physical toughness that I never saw from a Scott Frost team. And this win is turning the hope that they can go bowling, that they can be a good team, that they can perhaps be a great team into reality. Because I will tell you this, you're not losing to UCLA unless you decide that you want to lose to UCLA. You're not. Wisconsin at home should be winnable, especially without Tyler Van Dyke, with Ches Malusi likely out, and the fact that injuries are a part of football. They'll likely sustain more, and they're still questioning their identity. That's pretty obvious. USC, right now, if Nebraska's defense can put up 3/4 of the effort they did against Rutgers, and the offense can just play at their average level, that's a win, because USC does not match up well with the Big Ten at all. At all. Michigan's not a top 25 team, and they kicked UCLA's butts on the lines of scrimmage for an entire half, and when it came to be clutch time, they did the same thing. And Minnesota, with PJ Fleck, with more limited talent, especially at the skill positions and quarterback, compared to Nebraska, and with less depth overall, less resources, they beat USC. They took USC's lunch money from them, again, in clutch time. Nebraska is the type of team that as the season goes on, because of some of the young players that they're working in, especially with their quarterback, and also some players in the secondary too, transfers, guys who only really stepped up for a year, they can get better and better and better. It's also the same thing with the special teams. The special teams have bottomed out. They can't get worse. They will either stay this toxic, stay this cancerous, or they will level up. So I think it's safe to say that Nebraska is, well, back. Now, does back mean to blue blood status? I think while you can't technically lose blue blood status, I mean in the sense of playing to that level, they've been down for so long. It's been 7 years since they've gone to a bowl game that I think Nebraska being back just means that they can be a team that flirts with the top 25, like the Big Ten Nebraska teams under Bo Pelini did. That's what I mean by Nebraska being back. If Nebraska somehow ever contends for a national title again, which I think is possible, then I will have another Nebraska is back statement, but it will be obviously phrased differently. There will be different context to that. This is just phase one and the most important phase of Nebraska being back. And you see that in the fact that they had a blocked punt, they had an interception, they gave up 4 sacks and 7 TFLs. Nebraska, both of these defensive fronts and defenses manhandled and toyed with these offenses. Nebraska did all of that. Rutgers dominating them with the Knights defense versus the Huskers offense, after, especially in the second half. Raiola looking dazed, giving up the blocked punt, throwing the interception, allowing that play that bounced off of some player's head and then caught by Rutgers wide receiver to have a touchdown, and allowing that busted coverage to Rutgers' wide receiver, who, unfortunately for him, dropped the pass, would have been a touchdown. All of those things, the little mistakes, the big mistakes, the moments where Nebraska could have folded up the lawn chair and said, I don't want to do this. And they were tough, they fought for 60 minutes, and they won. And finally, before we get to our game MVP, the Black Shirts are an elite defense. They are like the Silver Bullets. Obviously not as good, but again, when you look at how efficient they are relative to their talent, this game reminded me of what Ohio State did to Michigan State a week ago, what they did to Iowa yesterday. Just total domination, forcing opponents to make mistakes, being patient, being tough, not giving up, calling good plays, adapting to the roster strengths while tweaking in what you want to do. Like, just good coaching, good execution, good athleticism, NFL-type play. They're not the nation's best defense, and I think I can safely say that because of what happened against Illinois, what happened against Northern Iowa, and the fact that they have not faced an offense that is Oregon, Ohio State, Penn State caliber yet. They haven't. They haven't even faced an offense that has the raw upside of MSU with Aiden Childs in that receiver corps. Well, never mind about that. They faced Illinois, but still, Illinois scored 31 points. Illinois was able to do whatever they wanted to in the passing offense on a consistent basis. So I'm not going to say they are a top 5 unit yet, but if they played like they did yesterday for the rest of the season, including against Ohio State, which would be very impressive, they'd put up an Iowa or even greater than Iowa type effort against the Buckeyes in Columbus, this could and will finish as a top 5 unit if they replicate that success. I don't know if that's possible, but maybe it is. I mean, they did it against Colorado. They did it here again against Rutgers, 2 elite dominant performances. So we know that it can be done, and it's not just a one-off. They held their own against a robust offensive line. They came up clutch when needed. They had 4 sacks, 9 tackles for loss, 9 passes defended, 2 interceptions. They held Rutgers to 5 yards per attempt and 2.4 yards per completion. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, fellow college football fanatics, those are elite numbers. Those are numbers that every defense in the SEC wishes they had, because no SEC defense has, in my mind, put up that type of a performance. I mean, think of Tennessee's defense, which I think got exposed a little bit against Arkansas. They haven't played a team all season long outside of Arkansas who had the type of non-negotiables on offense that Rutgers had. Arkansas is a really talented QB, great rushing attack. Rutgers has an awesome offensive line and a great running back. And you compare, I know it's just a 1-game sample size, but look at the rest of the body of work, and we don't have big sample sizes against great teams to go off of yet. Nebraska has a defense that all teams in every conference outside of Ohio State, Penn State, and Iowa would be jealous of. I mean, those are the type of numbers they put up here. And my MVP for the game, defensive end James Williams, he had 5 total tackles. He had 4 solo tackles, 2 sacks, and 2 TFLs. He came up big. The defensive line came up big. And I just got to tell you, what a job by Tony White. What a job by his assistants. What a job by Matt Rule, too, instilling the toughness in these players. Many of them kids, the remainder of them young men whose brains aren't even fully developed yet, to hang in there, to stay calm, to execute, and come out with a big win for Big Red. Thank you all so much for watching this video. Remember to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and comment your thoughts down below. Thanks to Crash2488, Brasco Rascal, and Honolulu OH for being Heisman members. Thanks to Chris Lane, Ismar, Tyler 9, Chilton Kush for being All-American members. And thanks to John Lynn, Roaming Gnome, Matthew Sale, Austin Christmas, Joshua Jorgensen, and Will Loftus for being all-conference members. Make sure to check out the Discord server, Patreon page, and merchandise store via the links in the description or down below in the pinned comment. Have a great day, everyone. Go Scarlet Knights and go Big Red.